I would like to begin by making reference to the congressional document of 1963 presented by Herlong Jr., which highlights what can be referred to as the 45 Communist Goals, of which include but are not limited to: number 3, develop the illusion that total disarmament by the United States would be a demonstration of moral strength. Number 17, get control of the schools. 20, infiltrate the press. I've decided to bring attention to these specifically because of the level of clarity with which they can be seen. Communist goal number 3 is an infringement upon a human's natural and inalienable right to defend themselves. A portion of the population today would argue that the Second Amendment was only meant to guarantee the right to bear arms to members of the armed forces. This is a misunderstanding that occurs primarily when a person overlooks the commas and ignores or is unaware of the definition of the word militia. The Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia, comma, necessary for the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed upon. What needs to be understood first is that a militia is composed of civilians. The initial battle of the American Revolution, fought April 19th of 1775, involved British troops against a gathering of armed civilians, who were a militia, by definition. These were also known as the Minutemen. These were not official members of the Continental Army. I'd like to focus on the commas placed within the text of the Second Amendment. It needs to be understood that grammatical punctuation serves a purpose. These commas were not put in place for aesthetics. They are meant to be functional. Commas are often used to separate clauses, so their placement here are meant to, in a sense, provide everything before and after a comma with its own personal space. When the Second Amendment is read with this in mind, we can see that the first two clauses were meant as acknowledgments, referencing what was already understood, which is that a standing army must be matched by the ability of the people. The Revolutionary War could not have been won without the efforts of the armed civilian. For the record, the claim that the word arms was only meant as a reference to the weapons that existed in the 18th century fails to acknowledge the definition of the word arms, which is weaponry. Therefore, the hard left isn't very good at grammar, which leads to communist goal number 17, the manipulation of schools by and for the communist mindset. This ties into another article I wanted to reference. Norwegian scientists Rogberg and Bratsberg, looking through the standardized test results of about 730,000, have concluded that young people's IQs are experiencing a decline, with those born in 1991 scoring 5 points lower than those born in 1975. Granted, IQ testing cannot determine the level of intelligence that a person may have. What an IQ test determines is the test taker's ability to do well within the conventional classroom. This should still be concerning, because by these terms, a lower IQ reveals a lowered ability to be successful within a classroom setting. So why is it clear to me that there exists a detrimental condition within the institution of education here in America? For starters, the majority of the youth here in South Florida, and quite possibly across the nation, have trouble engaging in discourse. Discourse is just a fancy word for conversation. The primary elements of conversation involve the exchange of ideas within the form of words. Debate is synonymous with discourse, and particularly involves formal discussion and argumentation. It was not until I read a textbook introducing me to the field of knowledge known as ethics that I realized that the majority of the things that I have expressed, and the majority of the things that I have heard or read others express, failed to meet the standards of what is considered ethical discourse. So just what is ethics? Ethics is the field of knowledge that seeks to attain logic, with logic being necessary for the exercising of good and the prevention of bad behavior. I came to understand that that which can be considered good benefits a majority, harms a minimum, or none at all, while what is bad harms a majority and only benefits a few. There is a methodology to ethics, and with it, the studious can learn to reason properly, learn to think critically, and eventually, potentially, come to agree upon what we ought to do as a people in order to propel us and the generations to come forward. Ethics is the tool which has been utilized by our American forefathers and those who inspired them, such as John Locke. It can even be traced back to ancient Greece. The ability to differentiate between the ethical and unethical, to even define what that means, to learn how to stay within those standards, is not something that has been kept from the general public without sinister intent. One of the things required for an ethical exchange is keeping our methods of reasoning free of fallacy. Every opinion, belief, and conclusion is reached through a method of reasoning, but not every method leads to a sound argument. The opinions we have, the beliefs we hold, The conclusion to be reached must have the ability to be reasoned. This is the quality of being reasonable. We do not become reasonable people without exercising reason, not without practice. Why are the teachings of ethics not a requirement? It is because, with an understanding of ethics, you start to question how some educators even got their job. You start to realize the assigned textbooks are biased. You start to see mainstream media for what it is, and you can say with certainty that something isn't right. 2 of 3 courses I am taking this summer are based on philosophy and biology. I have never read a more poorly written book than that which has been assigned to the philosophy students of my class. Never before have I found myself wincing through the pages of an academic textbook. What is most concerning is that the kids reading this crap probably can't detect a bias. Many of us are taught to believe that some sources are unquestionable. The most pervasive issue I find coming from books like these, from instructors, from mainstream press, from PC culture, student newspapers, social justice warriors, the pseudo-intellectual grounds upon which stands liberaldom is the lack of ethical reason. Coming to understand the hindrances that come with the use of ambiguous terms or any other of the numerous fallacies that exist helps a person decide when an argument is not worthy of being taken seriously. When a person is able to find the flaws within an argument of their own and that of another person, world views come crumbling. Previously held beliefs collapse in on themselves. The existence of God and the soul becomes a reasonable argument. Discourse becomes a process of growth as intellectual expansion takes place. The average educator, the average conversation, the average news segment, my own class textbook, rather than actually teaching something, they are merely providing the framework for the acceptance and adoption of a view that a student knows next to nothing about. My personal experience. The other day in class, a student asks our biology instructor, "Why isn't the government heading in the direction of solar panels?" The instructor's response was a completely irrelevant conclusion. The instructor said, "Money. Donald Trump and Marco Rubio have received money from oil companies." She didn't care to mention about how compared to the 90% efficiency of the conventional hydroelectric source of power, solar photovoltaics only have a 12% efficiency. She did not acknowledge how the functional quality of a solar panel decreases by 1% each year. She wouldn't even dare to mention that solar panels eventually stop working. She only saw an opportunity to make her antagonism contagious. She advocated the installation of an infrastructure that would be destined to lead the most powerful country on earth into a national blackout through only a few decades. And even these simple facts were not included in my teacher's response. It's just really weird and inappropriate to have a teacher unable to answer in a scientific method within a scientific class. She likes to mention the word global warming and the name of Republicans in a really condemning way. I don't expect her to mention the fact that for decades now, there have been international groups of scientists conducting research in the Arctic regions of the world, which include but are not limited to modern-day Antarctica, Greenland, and Canada. Some of the efforts include the analysis of ice cores, preserved layers of ice. Within their layers, they preserve remnants of the past through the preservation of trapped gases, minerals, and plant remnants. We can now say with certainty that the Earth has experienced 8 separate glacial and interglacial periods. A glacial period is a predominantly cold period in time, followed by a warmer period, the interglacial period, the 8th of which we are experiencing right now. Glacial periods are also known as ice ages, by the way. It was only up until recently that people were really concerned about someday Greenland melting away. They had no idea that there was land underneath. Ice cores have shown us that, in fact, there is dirt there. The case is the same in Antarctica. It's science like this that makes the term global warming useless. It's the very reason the term was abandoned officially and why people are now saying climate change. Wake the people up. Hey guys and gals at Infowars. And Mr. Jones, I'd like to mention that I speak Spanish. We could end up reaching the Spanish-speaking community. Could you imagine?